subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
We've made a downloadable transcript of this tutorial available as a free study tool. Just click the link below in the video details to get this.
Hello, and welcome to this overview of Todoist. My name is Dan Lefebvre, and I've been using Todoist pretty much since they started the company back in 2007. So right away, if you've never even heard of Todoist, Todoist is a task management tool. Now, I'm not associated with the company behind Todoist at all, so I have no idea how many customers they actually have. But I do know that they claim millions of users around the world, including a ton of huge companies and well over 150 million projects. So even though this is entirely my speculation, if I had to guess, I would say Todoist is one of the most popular task management tools out there. I know anytime there are task management tool write-ups or people talking about them online, Todoist is always one of those mentioned. Now, I mentioned companies, and that leads me into chatting about the different versions of Todoist, just so we're on the same page of what I'm using in this video and what you will see on your side. So essentially, there are three different versions of Todoist. Which one is right for you really boils down to what your needs are. Now, with the free plan, of course, there are going to be heavier limitations than the others, and you only get 5 projects. Now, that's not 5 projects total. That's just 5 active projects at any given time. But some of the biggest limitations in my mind on the free version are things like there's no comments on tasks, no labels, no reminders, and you cannot add tasks by email. Now, there's a pro version, which is what I use on a daily basis. And while I'm obviously a huge fan of Todoist myself, I would still recommend that you do not jump out there and buy a pro subscription to it quite yet. At least not until you've watched through this video, because, hey, the free version might have everything you need. And if so, great, you save some money there. Now, today, I will mostly be using the free version of Todoist, which is what I would recommend that you start with to see if you like it. Then towards the end of this video, we will be looking at some of the premium features so you can see those in action before making this decision whether or not to upgrade. Now, I will not be using Todoist Business in this video at all, but if your team at work is looking for a great task management tool, then you might want to check that out. It's basically the same as Todoist Premium, but for multiple users. So you're going to have like a higher cap on active projects. You have more people that you can have per project. You're also going to have a shared team inbox, and admin and member roles, as well as team billing instead of individual billing for individual users. Okay, so let's dive into Todoist and get familiar with the interface. All right, so this is the default interface inside of Todoist, and let's get started getting familiar with it by looking up here in the top left, because this is what Todoist calls the default views, these 3 views right here. The first one that we have here is the inbox. So by default, when you add a task into Todoist, it will be added into the inbox. Think of it like your email inbox. When you get sent an email, by default, it's going to be sent into the inbox, and then from there, you can organize it into whatever folders you want. Similar concept here inside of Todoist. By default, when you create a task, it will be added to the inbox, and then you can organize it into whatever project that you want. However, as we'll see throughout this video, we can speed things along by when we create a task, we can actually associate it with a specific project at the time of creation. And we will look at that later on in this video. Next, we have the Today view, which is going to show us, of course, all of the tasks that have a due date of whatever today's date is. It's the default view inside of Todoist, the default of the default views inside of Todoist, and it's a great way to just see what we have on our plate for today. Now, next we have the upcoming view, and I love this view because it shows us not only what we have today, but what we have going on over the next few days. And of course, we can scroll infinitely in order to see infinitely into the future, or we can select a specific date in order to hop to that. But one of the reasons why I love this upcoming view is because it's a great way to postpone tasks. There's always times where we have tasks that maybe we don't get to, or for whatever reason the due date is changed and we need to postpone that. A really quick way of doing that is if we come in here we can just drag that, and now all of a sudden that due date has been updated to, well, it's no longer due today, it's due tomorrow. And we can very, very quickly do that and move that task due date here in the upcoming view. And I want to point out this little icon here, because anytime that we see that inside of Todoist, it's going to allow us to drag that item. We'll see that over here underneath the default views. In projects, we can see we also have that icon where we can drag and reorganize our projects here. And that's going to be the same pretty much universally throughout the Todoist interface. Anytime you see that icon, you'll be able to drag and move that item around. And we will look at projects and hierarchies for projects and all of that later on in this video, get a little more in depth with those, but just know that that's where you can do that with the projects here inside of Todoist. Beneath the project, we have labels. So labels are a pro feature, as we mentioned earlier. You can see if I click on this, it could say, it's a premium feature, premium or pro. It used to be called premium, and then they started to shift the terminology to pro. Anytime you see that's pretty much the same thing. It's just kind of shifting that terminology there. But labels are a premium feature, so we won't be able to look at those right now because I am using a Todoist free account. But we will look at that later, some of the pro features later on in this video, so you can get a sense for those. And then we have our filters. So filters are also a pro feature, but we do have some free filters that Todoist has given us, some pre-built filters that we have for free. However, if we wanted to customize these and edit these, we can see, okay, that is a premium feature. We're not going to be able to do that. If you have a pro account, you can also create brand new filters from scratch and start to get really, really advanced with Todoist. A really, really great way of organizing things here inside of Todoist. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we will be looking at some of these pro features later on, so you can get a sense of what they look like before deciding if you want to pay for a subscription or not. Okay, so that is the menu. This whole area over here is what Todoist calls the menu. Up along the top, we have this hamburger icon that we can use to open or collapse or close the menu. If we want just a little bit more space, we can do that. We have our home view, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the today. So let's say we're looking at a specific project. We can click on the home in order to get back to our default view here. And I mentioned earlier, if you create a task and you're not sure where it is, it's probably going to show up inside of the inbox if you haven't associated a specific project with it. If you don't see it there, if you have a lot of tasks in the inbox, of course, you can always come in, search, or find your tasks here inside of Todoist. I do want to point out as I do this, you'll notice as I click on this or hover over these, you'll notice the keyboard shortcuts. So the keyboard shortcut for find is F. You can see the keyboard shortcut there. Keyboard shortcut for the home view is H, and then for the menu is M. So without even clicking on that, I could hit M on the keyboard in order to open that up. I can hit F in order to jump to that, in order to hop into that. Keyboard shortcuts inside of Todoist are something that I really love, because once you learn them, you can really speed up your workflow. You don't have to actually be clicking around the interface. You can just use keyboard shortcuts to navigate things around. Over here on the right-hand side, we have a few more items. We have the plus, which is going to allow us to add a task. And again, we have a keyboard shortcut, Q, in order to quick add a task. It's a keyboard shortcut that once you start using Todoist a lot, it's a keyboard shortcut you'll be using a lot inside of Todoist, trust me. And then we have our karma. So karma is basically Todoist's way of gamifying productivity. We get points for things like completing tasks, and then we get points deducted if a task is overdue for too long. Of course, we don't have to do this. This is something that's completely optional, but I really like the way that Todoist tries to gamify this, and it's fun to gain points and gain experience points, and you think of it like a game. You can level up your productivity, things like that. We'll look at setting goals and how we can work with karma a little bit more later on in this video, but just know that that's where karma is on the interface here inside of Todoist. And then we have, of course, help. So at any time, if you want to start to learn those keyboard shortcuts, I would highly recommend starting to get familiar with some of those as you're using Todoist. If you start to think that Todoist is something you're going to be using on a more daily basis, then learning those keyboard shortcuts would really behoove you in order to move around a lot faster. We have our notifications. So if you're sharing a project with someone and they assign a task to you, or if you're using a pro account and someone comments on your tasks, or you want to comment on somebody else's, then you can have Todoist email you that notification, but you'll also see that notification here inside of Todoist itself. It'll pop up here. And then, of course, we have a profile, typical profile settings. We can change, the theme, print the current view. If you want to upgrade to Pro, you can do that here. You can get all of the mobile apps, all of those types of things. So, for example, we could come in here and say, I like to use the dark theme. We can switch that. And right away, we've got our theme switched to the dark theme here in our settings. And one nice little thing that I kind of went a little fast there, but if we look at the theme, you'll notice that we have the ability to sync the theme. So what that means is if we're using Todoist on our mobile phone or wherever else we're using Todoist, there's a lot of different apps that Todoist has, we can sync that theme. So whatever theme we choose, say if we want to use the dark theme, we want to sync it, well, that will sync it across the mobile app. So on our phone, it'll be the dark theme. If we're using the Todoist for Windows application, it'll be the dark theme. You'll start to sync that across wherever we're using the application. Okay, so that's a look at the interface. Now let's get familiar with how task management works in Todoist. And to show this example, we'll use some real tasks that I have to do for my podcast. So let's start by creating a new project. So under projects here, we'll click on the plus in order to create a new one. Let's give it a name. I'll give it the name of my podcast. We can give it a color. The color that we choose, and it's going to be the same for a lot of things. Of course, it's completely up to you how you want to organize things. Personally, I like to color coordinate my projects so they're based on what they are. So for example, if it's a work-related project, then it's going to be a different color than if it's a personal project. So in this case, let's maybe go with something like blue. And so all my podcast-related projects would be blue, right? And it would be kind of a way to look at that. And then if I have personal projects, then that could be yellow and so on. So I'm going to stick with blue here. And we'll look at favorites and the view. We'll look at that later on. But for now, let's just go ahead and create our project. We can see it shows up over here. And as we saw earlier, of course, we can reorganize this if we want to change that in our projects list. And now let's start to add our first tasks inside of Todoist. And there's multiple ways that we can do this. Of course, we can come in, just click on Add Task, type in the name of our task. Come up with 5 episode, if I could spell properly. See, there we go. Click on Add Task, or we can just hit Enter on the keyboard in order to create that task. And you'll notice when I hit Enter, it's going to automatically jump into creating a new task. So it's just a nice way of working a little bit faster. And it's one of the things that I love about Todoist is that there's a lot of ways that we can just start to work a little bit faster here and there. And it really starts to add up and save time, which of course is kind of the point of being productive, save time here and there. So we can add another task, hit Enter, and then, maybe add another one. Okay, so rather than hitting Enter, I can click on Add Task. In order to do that, you'll see it's going to pop up there. Starting off there, I'm going to hit Cancel in order to cancel out of creating our new tasks. Okay, so now that we have a few tasks that we've added, once we've added tasks into Todoist, one thing that's really cool about this list view here is we can organize them into a hierarchy. Okay, so we have these 3 tasks here. Let's actually add another one. I'm going to add podcast production, and then we'll add one for marketing. There we go. So added those tasks. Now that we have these, let's start to reorganize these. So maybe the newsletter is marketing. So I'm going to click and drag and organize this. Watch what happens here. You can see that how it's kind of darker there. If I shift over to the right, you'll see it indents in. As soon as I let go of this, you'll see now all of a sudden, this is a subtask of this one right here. So we can do that with these others as well. We can start to shift that in. And you can see now all of a sudden we've added a hierarchy to our tasks. So now that we have this hierarchy, if I were to add a new task here, it's not going to add it as a subtask to any of these. It's going to add it at the root level of that hierarchy. So how can I add a task in a subtask in here? Say we wanted to add a new subtask under podcast production. What we can do is just click on the task here. We can see we have these new subtasks, or these subtasks that we've added rather. Just add in a new subtask here. And there we go. Again, it's going to start to, continue to add new tasks as we want to. We can cancel out of that. We've added in that new subtask. Now, before we get too much further, let's pause for a moment here and get familiar with this dialog overall, because as I mentioned earlier, I am using a free account and some of these features are pro only. For example, if we hop over to the comments tag, you can see this is a pro feature. If I start to add something, hit comment, you'll see it's like, okay, this comments is a pro feature only. We can't actually add a comment into this. However, we can see this. So if this project is shared with somebody else, and we'll look at this kind of concept later on, but if you see comments in here, that means somebody that has a pro account has access to that project and they've added comments in here. So as a free account, you can read comments that other people have added. You just can't add your own. And then we have our activity log, which, of course, this is going to be something that is a pro feature as well. But in here is where we would see things like if somebody adds a comment, we would see who added it and when they added subtasks, pretty much a history of what has happened on this task, who made those changes, and when. It can be a helpful little thing that you can access. Realistically, I've used Todoist for many, many years, and it's pretty rare when I actually have to come into the activity log. So I guess I wouldn't say that that's the reason to upgrade to a pro account, but it is helpful. These little icons here, we have the ability to move. And again, this is for this task here, right? Not necessarily these subtasks, but if we were to click on this and move this to a new project, that would also move those subtasks along with it into that new project. It would keep that hierarchy and move that into the new project. So if I were to say maybe move this to the inbox, you can see now our project, this is the project here. Now our task is under that project and the subtasks have moved as well. So that's something to keep in mind when you're working with tasks and subtasks. If you move the root, the hierarchy stays in place. So we can move this back if we wanted to, shift that back to the project that we want. We also have our labels. So again, labels are a premium feature. And we have our priority. So the priority is pretty straightforward. By default, when you create a task inside of Todoist, it's going to be priority 4, which is the lowest level. But if we wanted to change that, then that's going to change where in that list it shows. So priority 1 is going to show higher in a list than priority 2, higher than priority 3, and so on and so forth. It's just a way of being able to see the higher priority items at the top of the list, essentially. So if we were to shift this, you can see now this is red. So if we shift back to our project here, not only is this one, it's red because it's a different priority level, but we can come in here and we can sort this so we can see now all of our, higher priority items are shown at the top versus our lower priority. And, at any time we could shift this if we wanted to, say maybe this is now priority level 3. This one is priority level 1. And now that's going to rearrange how those tasks are organized in this list view. Now, there's a couple other items I want to point out here, these last couple of icons. This one here allows us to add a reminder. Reminders are a pro or premium feature, and we will look at these later on in this video, but I will point out right now, this is the first time we've talked about reminders. Personally, reminders in and of themselves are enough of a reason. That's essentially the reason why I upgraded to Pro initially, was because of reminders. I use them all the time, and they're super helpful to make sure no task gets left behind. And then we have a few more things. Of course, we can rename the task, which would just pop up that. You can always just click in here in order to rename the task as well. We have the ability to add comments via email, which is going to be another pro feature, but we would basically be given an email address we could link to automatically add comments in here. But as we looked at earlier, because we are using a free account, comments are a pro feature. We can't even add comments to this task quite yet. We also have the direct link to this task. It's helpful if you're using email and you have that copied. So if I paste this up here, you can see this is the direct link to this task. Of course, if you send this to somebody who does not have access to this project, say maybe they don't even have a Todoist account, they don't have access to this project, then of course they're not going to access that. But if they have a Todoist account and they have access to that project to be able to see the task, then they will be able to do that. And we have the ability to hide completed subtasks. So in order to see this in action, so if I were to complete one of these tasks, you can see it gets crossed out, it's been completed, but we can still see it in that list. If we wanted to hide those, we can just toggle that on and off in order to show or hide our completed subtasks. And then of course, the ability to delete the task. This is something to keep in mind, is that you'll notice that not only is it deleting this task here, it's also going to delete the subtask as well. So 3 tasks are 2 uncompleted tasks, as well as the root level task there as well. So that's something to keep in mind. It deletes all of those. And once you delete it, it's gone. There's no trash. There's no recycle bin. You can't bring it back. It's completely gone. So make sure if you want to delete it, you actually, or if you don't want to delete it, that you don't actually delete that. Okay, so we saw how we can work with hierarchies in tasks. And in this example, I'm almost using them sort of like sub-projects, if you will. But that brings up another point, because you can actually have hierarchy in projects too. So over here under the projects, if I click on the little 3 dots here, we can add a project. So let's add a project below. Let's call this our podcast production. I'll keep it the same color, hit add. And then let's add it in another project here. There we go. Once we've added these projects, now if I come over here and move this, watch what happens. I can do the same thing that I did with the task. You'll notice how it indents there. Indent that, all of a sudden that is a sub-project. Now under this project here, we have these sub-projects that can have their own tasks, right? So if we wanted to, we could take this task here, this marketing task. Let's move this into the marketing project. There we go. You can see now the marketing task has been moved under the project. And, maybe we want to remove that from the hierarchy, get rid of this. And so, we can organize this however we want. But hopefully you're starting to get to see how the hierarchies can help and how you can use them, either hierarchies inside of tasks or hierarchies inside of projects, to organize things really however you want. And that's one of the powerful things about Todoist is there's a lot of different tools that we have in order to organize things however you want, whatever is most efficient for you. Now, another way that we can move our tasks between projects is by just clicking and dragging them from here over to the project. But you'll notice we don't get that little icon over here, this little icon to be able to move. That's because we have this sorted right now. So as soon as I remove that sort, you can see we get that back, and then I can just drag it over, bring it into our project, and now we've moved all of those items. And again, if we wanted to, we can maybe remove these as subtasks, bring it out. There we go. You just want to be aware, like if I were to drag this up here, you notice if I let go right now, it's adding it as subtasks. So just be aware kind of where that dark spot is on that in order to see where in the hierarchy it's going to add that. And instead of completing this, if we wanted to, we could actually delete this task. There we go. And now we've basically shifted our organization of this from having tasks and subtasks in using projects and sub-projects. So now we can organize this to say we have a bunch of tasks under the root project, and then we have different tasks under each of these sub-projects as well. So as you can see, there's a lot of flexibility with how we organize things. But before we continue on, when I created these projects, I created them as a list. But there was another view that we can look at, and those are boards. So let's come in, let's maybe see this project here. And we can change this view at any time for any of these projects. All we have to do is to come up here into the 3 little dots and change the view to a board. So now what we have essentially is something similar if you're familiar with like a Kanban board or something like that. We have a very similar concept here where we have all of our tasks associated with our sections. So right now we don't have any actual sections added, but if we could come in and let's say we want to create our not started. Let's add another section here. Let's call this in progress. Completed. And then we can start to take these tasks and drag them into these different sections in order to organize them. So you can see, okay, maybe once we have this one, okay, we started to find a guest. This one is currently in progress. We can drag it into these different sections and organize them however we want to do. Now, you'll notice that when I drag this into completed, it doesn't automatically complete this task, right? That's not the same as clicking on this and completing it as far as Todoist is concerned. Let me undo to bring that back so we can see that there. I just want to point that out, that creating a section, all we're doing here is changing how we organize that. It's not really completing the task as far as Todoist is concerned. And as of this recording, there's really no way to say, as soon as I drag this into a section that happens to be called completed or complete or done or whatever that is, to actually complete that task. That's not something you can do inside of Todoist. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're using sections, how you're using them. Maybe instead, rather than having this completed section, let's delete this. And instead, once it's in progress, instead of dragging it to a new section called complete, we just click the little, the radio button here, the check box in order to complete that task instead. So sections are a great way in order to organize our tasks here, but we can come in, we can create new sections. You'll notice as I hover over here, we can add a new section in. So let's add a section right here. Let's call this maybe error check. So we're error checking our podcast. We can add in a new task. Episode number 1. This is, once we get it started. Actually, you know what? Error check would make sense to be after in progress. After we're working on it, then we do the error check so we can move our sections around, organize those however we want. So our workflow here could be, we're working on the episode. As we're working on that, goes into error check, and we start to, you can start to see how this sort of process could work. And, we could even get down even further into this and start to organize things even more so, kind of like what we saw earlier, rather than having, finding the guest to interview on an episode actually being a separate task. Maybe it's a subtask of episode number 1, and we start to organize it that way and start to break all of this down in a way that makes sense. That's the key, is whatever really makes sense for you as far as the organization is concerned. And of course, at any time, if we didn't want to use the board view, we could always switch back to our list view. You can see we still have our sections that we've created. We can still come in and add in a new section if we wanted to. So maybe once we've sent something over to the guest, we're waiting on them. Episode number 1 is currently waiting on the guest, and organize these into different ways. So again, we have our hierarchy on our tasks. We have tasks and subtasks. We have hierarchies on our projects. We have sections. So sections aren't tasks, but we can organize them in a kind of a similar way with hierarchies, right? Where we have a section, we have tasks underneath those sections to organize everything. Sections are just another way that we can organize our tasks. I would encourage you to take some time to think through your tasks and projects. See how you want to organize them in a way that makes sense to you inside of Todoist. And remember, there's no right or wrong. It's whatever works best for you. And of course, at any time, you can always change back and forth between creating and organizing projects, tasks and subtasks, sections, and these project views. Now, before we continue on, there's a couple other cool tips and tricks that we can do in order to make our lives easier in Todoist. One of those is recurring tasks. So if we want to create a recurring task, we can set that up very easily in Todoist by telling it how often it will repeat. So I'm going to do this. Let's hop back to our main project here, just so it's a little bit easier and cleaner to see here. Let's create a new task. And I'm going to say, moderate comments on the YouTube channel. And we're going to start to use some certain terminology in order to tell Todoist to organize this automatically. So rather than creating a priority level, rather than coming over here, clicking on the priority level, you'll see that as I hover over this, it says P1, P2, P3, and P4. What that means is as I type this in, I could say this is P2. As soon as I do that, you'll notice Todoist recognizes that is a priority level. And when I create this task, it's going to be a priority level of 2. We can take this a step further and say, you know what? I want to do this every Friday. So it's going to recognize, not only is it creating it Friday, but you can see it has this little recurring icon. So as soon as I add this task, this is now due on Friday. But if I were to complete this, watch what happens. It's going to be due the following Friday, right? So basically, this one task is going to recur every single Friday from here until infinity, essentially, until we delete the task or get rid of the task itself. So really, really cool things that we can do with our recurring task. But that smart way of adding in the tasks is dates and priority is not the only way that we can use this. So let's come in again and create a new task. So instead of creating a new task here, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Q, which is going to create a quick add a new task. And let's say confirm interview with guests. I want to do it tomorrow at 3 p.m. So at a very specific time. And I want to make sure that this is added not to our Based on a True Story podcast project, which is the podcast or the project we're currently in. When you create a new task here inside of the Todoist interface, it will create it in the project that you are currently in. But I want to add this to a different one. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where you can create a new task and add it specifically to a particular project. So to do that, we use the # or hashtag. You can see we can pick from our projects here, or we can start to type and say, I want to add this to the podcast production. One thing before I do this, I do want to point out too, you'll notice not only can we add it to the task, we can actually add it to a specific section. So that's another benefit of using sections in your projects is we could say, not only do we want to add this to the podcast production project, but I want to make sure to add this to our not started, right? So hasn't been started, add the task. Now, if we hop back over here, we can see this task has been added to our not started section. And really being able to type out the task that way, and once you start to get more familiar with Todoist, you'll get familiar with that little terminology that you can use, the # or hashtag in order to add to projects, the P1, P2 in order to add to priority. You'll start to get familiar with that in order to speed up your workflow, making adding tasks to your task management tool very, very easy. And if you're using a pro account, that works for labels. And if you add a time to it, so like if we added a time to this, if you're using a pro account, by default, we can have Todoist set a reminder, and then we will get that reminder. Again, that's if you're using a pro account, you would be able to get that reminder right away. Okay, now that we're familiar with the basics of task management in Todoist, let's dig under the hood a little bit further to see how we can customize it to fit our needs better. So just a moment ago, we looked at typing out our task in a way that Todoist automatically recognizes things like the due date. So if I'm going to hit Q in order to create a new task, say we're going to start on episode 2 next week, we can see that gets highlighted and automatically it's going to be added. The due date is going to be on Monday. Now, if any time you don't want that feature enabled, we can always turn that off in the settings. So if we would hop up here into settings, and come into general and turn off the smart date recognition. So we could say, you know what, no thanks, I don't want that. I don't want Todoist to automatically recognize that. Now, I do want to point out that by default, that is going to be enabled, so you will have that feature turned on, but you could turn that off if you wanted to. Now, I'm going to leave that on because I personally like that feature. But while we're in here, we can control how Todoist interprets some of that text. For example, when we added that task, we said next week. Well, what day is that exactly? We saw that it was added as Monday, but we could change that. Say, you know what, next week for me actually means Sunday. So now with that, if I come in here, let's come back to our project here. Let's maybe add in a new task. Now, all of a sudden, I type in next week, that task gets added as Sunday. So we can start to control that. And there's even more things that we can control in here. Rather than next week, if we were to say we wanted to do something on the weekend, what day is that? Actually, we could change that based on whatever our schedule is. Now, while we're in the settings, let's just kind of go over this real quick so we can get an idea of what sort of options we have in here. So we have our subscription. Of course, this is just going to allow us to manage our subscription. Currently, there's really nothing in here since I'm using a free account, but we could upgrade that if we wanted to. All of our billing information, things like that. If we have a pro account, a paid account, then any invoices, we can download that information here. We also have the theme. We looked at this earlier. We can change the theme of Todoist. You'll notice some of these have a star. Those are premium themes. So when you have a pro account, you'll be able to access some of these different themes as well. But there's a handful of these that we can use. And personally, I like to use the dark theme, which is a free theme anyway. And we have our Karma. So I mentioned Karma earlier. That's basically the gamification aspect that Todoist has. It's really just a fun way we can start to make being productive fun. We could turn that off if we don't want that at all. We can completely turn Karma off. But if we have it turned on, which it is by default, we can start to configure that in here. Maybe what is our goal? What's our goal? We want to get 5 tasks done each day, right? So that's our goal here. We could adjust that if we wanted to. And then when we hit that goal, we're going to get experience points, and that's going to help us level up in our productivity and our karma level, as it were. And then we also have things like our days off. So by default, Saturday and Sunday are going to be days off, thinking that's going to be the weekend. But depending on our work schedule, maybe we want different days off. The key here is that if you have a day off or if you're on vacation mode, then what's going to happen is if there are tasks that are due that you do not get done, you're not going to lose your points. You're not going to lose your karma and your experience points, essentially, if you think of it that way. You're not going to lose that for not getting things done on your days off. Okay, so again, it's just a fun way of gamifying productivity. And we have our notifications. So in here, we can control, yes, we saw where notifications were in the interface earlier. Yes, I want to get those notifications on the web, or no, I don't want to get those on the web. And then we can see what sort of notifications we're going to get. If there's comments, tasks assigned to me, and all of these different things, we can start to choose, how do I get these? Do I get these on email? Do I get these as a push notification on mobile? Or maybe none of those. Maybe we don't want to get those notifications. We really start to configure that however we want. Then we have our integration, so we can start to integrate Todoist with other tools. For example, if you use Google Calendar, then you can connect Todoist to Google Calendar and actually have a two-way sync. So as you complete, or if you can add something into Google Calendar to your Todoist calendar, it'll automatically show up in Todoist and vice versa in order to sync those back and forth. It's a nice little way. It's kind of outside the scope of what we're actually doing in this particular video, but that's a fun way in order to integrate that. We can also see what sort of applications we've authorized. So if you're familiar with tools like If This Then That or IFTTT or Zapier, then you can start to manage their access in here and see what tools we have that have access to your Todoist account. Okay, so we've covered a lot up until this point, but we've only been using a free account. And I mentioned that we will get the chance to look at some of the pro features. Now, here is where I will point out that if you are using a pro account, you will see another couple of settings in here for reminders and backups. So we're going to hop into a pro account, but real quick, before we do that, let's actually share the project that we created with that pro account so we can see what that process looks like on both sides, both from sharing it and then what it looks like on the other side of being shared. So I'm going to close out of this. Let's come into our project here. Let's share the project. And I'm going to share my Pro account. So I'm going to invite. There we go. And then we will hop into our Pro account. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, let me show what this looks like over here. So on my email, if we pull that up here, we can see we get this notification that we've been invited to a project in Todoist. And then if we actually hop over, close out of my email here and hop over to, this is my Pro account. You notice I'm also using the dark theme here. But up here in our notifications, we'll see that we got a notification to be added to this project. So we can click on accept. As soon as we click on accept, now under our projects, we will see this new project that we've been added to. So if we hop into this task here and add a comment, we could say maybe something like, hey, can you tackle it this week? And you'll see that it's going to notify everybody in this project about the comment. We can hit that. We could even assign this to somebody else in the project if we wanted to. We can see who that's been assigned to. And then if we hop back over to our free account, we can see what this looks like. So we get these notifications here. Oh, it's been read. There's actually a new comment. We can see that. Even though we're using a free account, we can see this comment. Now, of course, we can't reply back to it because in a free account, we actually can't create comments, but we can kind of see this circle that I talked about earlier where if we were to comment on a Pro account, we can see that in the free account. Okay, so let's hop back into the Pro account to look at some of the Pro features. Earlier, I mentioned one of the most powerful features in Todoist that in and of itself is something that I use so much personally that I think it's worth the cost of the Pro account. That would be reminders. So let's look at how those work. So I'm going to create a new task here. Hit Q in order to create a new task. And let's say the task is to listen to episode 2 on any errors. And I'm going to set that to happen in 30 minutes from now. So I happen to be recording this at 8:25 in the morning. And so it's going to set it at 8:55. And I'm going to set this at a priority level of 1. So because I'm in my free account, by default, I set a time on this, which means I'm going to get a reminder. So if I add this task, we're going to get a reminder. We can see specifically when this is because we have a few minutes before this reminder pops up, and we'll see what that looks like when it does. But if I hop into my settings here, when we were looking at the settings earlier in the free account, I mentioned that there were a few different options that we have in the Pro account that we don't have in the free. And one of those is the reminders here. So we can see by default, a reminder is going to be set 10 minutes before the time that we have. So we set that at 8:55 in the morning. That means at 8:45 in the morning, that's when the reminder is going to happen. That reminder is going to happen as a mobile push notification. If you have the app installed on your phone, you can choose email if you want to. Personally, I just like to get a notification on my phone, push to the Todoist app that is installed on my phone. So that's how I have that set here. Now, if you don't want that, if you don't want an automatic reminder, you can always turn that off in here. But I like to get that. Sometimes I'll even set this earlier, depending on what that is. Sometimes I've had times where if I'm in the middle of a big project or there's a lot of tasks that I'm doing where I need some prep beforehand, I'll set it to almost 30 minutes beforehand. So I could say, you know what, I'm going to need a little bit of time, maybe a reminder to get to a meeting or something like that, or to get something done before a meeting and have a little bit of prep time in order to see that. So I see the reminder and I know that it's due in 30 minutes, but I still have 30 minutes to get that done. So it gives me a little bit of leeway there. I really like that ability to adjust the default timing. So this is what our reminder looks like. You can see it pop up here on the phone. And we could come in here and we could complete it right away. We could schedule it for a different time if we wanted to, or we can snooze it for 30 minutes. Now, one thing that's cool about reminders is they don't actually have to be tied to a day and time. We can also create a reminder based on location. So say we wanted this to be based on location for whatever reason, we can come into our reminders, and rather than doing date and time, let's choose our location. We can say, you know what, where do we want this to be? Let's say we want this to be in when we leave New York. So this is going to be either when I arrive or when I leave. When we leave, and then we have that there. We're going to leave that area. And of course, we can get a lot more specific if you have a specific location for your store. I use this a lot for the grocery store nearby. When I get to the grocery store, pop up a reminder for my shopping list, the things that I need to get at the grocery store, or things like that. Really, really helpful to be able to use location-based reminders. Okay, so there are a few more features that I wanted to touch on quickly before we wrap up today. So let's hop back into our Pro account on the browser. One of the Pro features that I mentioned earlier is labels. So let's look at those now. Labels are pretty straightforward. They're just like any labels or tags that you find in any other app. They're just a way of organizing your tasks. And personally, I like to organize my label by location, not necessarily the location, like with the location-based reminders being that specific, but you can see here some of the labels that I have. So if I am at my desktop computer, there are some things that I can only access from there, things that are on the hard drive. There are software applications that I have on my desktop that I don't have on my phone or things like that. So if there are tasks that I need to do in there, then I can add a label to that. And that's just my personal organization, the way that I use labels. You can use them however you want, of course. But there are some things that I can do from anywhere. Maybe access to email. I can access email on my computer, or I can access it on my phone. So in order to add a label, what we want to do is let's use this task that we created here as an example. If we edit this, well, actually, I'll show you a couple ways. Either one, we could come in here and add a label directly right here, choose from them. Or if we're editing our task, and this is the same as if we are creating a task, we can add in our labels. So let's say for this one, this is going to be something that I do on my phone. So I'm just going to hit the @ and then start typing it in. You can see that Todoist recognizes that. As soon as I hit space in order to keep typing, you can see that Todoist recognizes that, just like it did with the priority and the due dates and the project and things like that that we looked at earlier in this video. Now, as soon as I save this, we can see that label has been applied. So you can see that label has been applied here. This label over here. You can see the color of the text that's based on the color of the label itself. So we could change that color. Again, color coordination is just a nice little way of organizing things however you want. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, when we're creating a task, so if I hit Q in order to create a task, send an email to something like that, we can make sure it's in the right project. So we have this project that we want to make sure we add it to. We can add our label to it. Email, I'm going to add a priority to it. You can see we can start to type all of this out and make this a lot faster to create our tasks, right? So add that task. We can see that's added in there. We can view all of our tasks based on that, or based on projects, however we want to organize that, and then view all of those tasks. And one thing I do want to mention about projects, this is another Pro feature that's super helpful, is we can come in here and we can actually email tasks to this project. So this is an email address. You can see this here. If we forward over or select this, we can see this is the email address. You can just click to copy it to the clipboard if we want. Now, when you have a Pro account, each project has a unique email address like this that you can send something to and then have it show up automatically inside of this project. So let's see this in action here. I'm going to just make sure I have this copied again. Yep, there we go. Have that copied. Let's come over. I'm going to open up my email here. Let's compose a new email to that project. And the subject will be the task title. And then anything in the body, this will be the comment on the task. So when we send that, if we hop back over to our project, we will see that task show up inside of this project. Now, how long it takes can kind of depend on, it's being sent and transferred on the servers and stuff like that. So sometimes it can take a few minutes in order to show up here. But after a few minutes, we can see that the task gets added up. We can see this is the task title. That was the subject in the email. And then the comment here, you can see gets added. Now, this is super helpful. And just as a little pro tip here, I would recommend if you're using this, and once you start to get using Todoist, actually create context in your email application so that you can forward emails. So for example, what I've done is a lot of times in the past is I will set up, say if I have this project for based on a true story podcast, then I will have a contact inside of Gmail that is this project. So anytime I get an email that I want to add as a task, I can just take that and forward it directly inside of Gmail. And then you can take that to the next level and even start to add in filters and have Gmail automatically start forwarding some emails. Say, for example, if there's an automated a receipt or something like that you want to make sure to take action on, and receipt that comes in, those emails get automated. Or maybe, traveling to somewhere and you get some sort of a notification for your airline ticket, well, that can come in as an email notification and have that automatically forward through your email application. So you can start to get a sense for some of the customization that you can do and really start to harness some of the power of Todoist using some of these pro features. Okay, so the last feature I want to talk about are filters. Now, we saw earlier that with the free accounts, we do get some free filters, but I wanted to cover this feature last because filters make a lot more sense now that we're familiar with some of the other features that we've looked at, like due dates and labels and projects and so on. So with filters, basically we can create a saved search query that lets us quickly find the tasks that we want. So for example, let's say I'm going to create a new filter. This is going to be Bullets Priority Level 1 tasks. Okay. Now the query, we can start to use some of the same sort of markdown or terminology and things like that we've seen as we're creating tasks. So let's say I want make sure that this is in the project. There we go. Make sure that's the project and anything that is priority level 1. Okay. Now we can, of course, use the colors, same thing that we saw earlier. We can add this to the favorites. We didn't really look at favorites too much. That's this right here. Basically, all adding it to the favorites does is just adds it up here, but you can add projects and filters and labels to favorites and start to mix all of that so you don't have to sift through all of these. But if we add this, we can see we have filtered down to just this one task because that is the only task inside of this project that is a priority level 1. As soon as we add another task to priority level 1, let's maybe add this one to that. Now our filter is going to show both of those tasks. And of course, at any time we could take this filter, we could add it to our favorites. You can see it gets added up here. If you don't want to sift through all of the different projects and labels and filters, adding those to favorites can be just a handy way of accessing that very quickly. Now, filters are one of those things that really depends on how you organize your projects, how you're going to use them. So that's why I recommend kind of taking a step back and starting to think through how you're going to organize your tasks and your projects first, and then you can start to build filters off of that. So for example, I can show you one of these. So my filter here, if we edit this, we can see what this is doing. So we can see what this looks like. I can explain this real quick. Basically, the query that we're doing here, and it can be a little bit a little advanced here, but let me explain this. Basically, I'm saying anything that has a due date of being overdue or having a due date of today. That's what little bar means. And it is in the work project. But you'll notice I have 2 hashtags instead of 1. That makes a difference in the filter to include the hierarchy. So we looked at hierarchies in projects. I can show you my projects here and the work project that I have in the filter. I actually have a hierarchy of different projects, right? So I'm saying not only just show the tasks in this one project, I want to show the tasks in this project and any of these projects underneath it. That is what if we hop back and edit this filter again, that's what the 2 hashtags instead of 1 means, right? So little things like that. So all of that, or if it's overdue today and all of these different labels, right? So I'm using all of these different, I realize I can get to be really advanced, and realistically, we could start to dive into filters a whole lot. End of the day, it really boils down to how you organize your tasks inside of Todoist. Figure that out first, and then you can start to build filters around that. And when you do, I would highly recommend coming in here and going to the help for Todoist, because they have a lot of great things like, using the different tasks, right? So using, how do you want to filter by due date? How do you want to filter by project, sub-project? So you can see it explains what the difference is between 1 hashtag or 2, right? Or, you can start to use all of these different things together. And as you can see, there's a ton of different options that we have for using filters to help us find the tasks that we want very, very quickly. My advice is that once you start getting more comfortable with the basics of Todoist, I would really encourage you to start taking advantage of filters to make yourself even more efficient by surfacing the tasks that you need to see when you need to see them. Okay, now it's your turn. Productivity is one of those things that you'll get out of it what you put into it. So if you really want to be more productive, you will have to invest some time up front. As I mentioned a few times throughout this video, take some time, think through the tasks that you have. How can you start to organize those tasks into projects? And then what sort of hierarchy can you build in Todoist with projects and sub-projects, or even tasks and subtasks, to start to harness everything that you need to get done? And then how can you start to incorporate things like sections or list views or board views in different projects in order to take advantage of all those features inside of Todoist? And with that, we've come to an end of this video. I really hope that you found this video beneficial in helping you figure out some of the features inside of Todoist, but really helping you to become more productive using Todoist. Thanks for watching.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. Now, to get the course transcript and follow along with this video, click right over there. And click over there to watch more videos on YouTube from Simon Says It.